Mi nombre es Tomás Mata, voy a estar moderando este panel. El título del panel es Agricultura circular y manejo sustentable del suelo, y como les dije, está a cargo de Jan-Peter Leschen. Sorry for the pronunciation, Jan-Peter, but I'm trying to spell your surname. La charla de Jan va a ser en inglés. Las preguntas que lleguen las pueden hacer obviamente en español y después las vamos a traducir para hacérselas a él. La sesión esta forma parte del ciclo de charlas dentro del Simposio de Agricultura Circular, que se inauguró hoy con la participación de la ministra de Agricultura de los Países Bajos, Carola Schouten. Y a lo largo de la presentación, ustedes van a poder enviar las preguntas, como les dije, en la sección que ven a la derecha de su pantalla, y cuando finalice se las vamos a hacer a Jan. Después en el menú superior de la página del Congreso, ustedes tienen una sección de asistentes donde pueden buscar a los oradores y pueden contactarlos y poder mandarles mensajes inclusive a ellos. Bueno, lo presento a Jan-Peter Leschen. Jan-Peter tiene más de 10 años de experiencia en emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero, ciencia del suelo, uso de la tierra, agricultura y modelización a escala regional. Trabaja en investigación ambiental desde 2008 como investigador y jefe de proyectos suelo y clima en la Universidad de Wageningen, en Holanda. Una característica clave de su trabajo es la integración de conocimiento y datos de diferentes conocimientos especializados, por ejemplo, sobre el uso de la tierra, el medio ambiente y la agricultura. Así que buenísimo el tema para poder tenerlo en este congreso y escucharlo. So, Jan, the introduction is already made, and now is your turn. I think you're going to share your screen. Just go ahead, and then at the end, we're going to have some questions from the audience. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for this introduction. Buenas tardes a todos. Gracias para escuchar esta charla. Sí voy a hacerlo el resto en inglés, pero sí entiendo un poco de español. Okay, thank you. So I want to talk about circular agriculture and sustainable soil management, which is, circular agriculture, as you might have heard in this morning session, is now very much promoted by our Dutch Ministry of Agriculture. And also sustainable soil management is currently widely recognized that this is required, and many of the policies in Europe are now focusing, trying to have more attention for soils. So what are the main challenges in European agriculture that we have? First of all, we have to reduce emissions to air and water, especially we have quite some nitrogen emissions from agriculture, ammonia emissions, and also water pollution, nitrate leaching, and phosphorus leaching. As all countries, also in Europe, agriculture has to contribute to climate change mitigation. Although also adaptation is important, becoming more important as its climates in Europe is becoming more drier as well. And important is to reduce the use of primary resources, where circular economy has been put central as well by the European Commission. So for agriculture, this partly the use of fossil energy, but important is also the use of fossil phosphorus, which is mined and not renewable. So this should be used more in a circular way. Well, for agriculture, here comes the soils is a very important component where this comes together. And the management of soils is key for different aspects and functions of the soil. First of all, for soil fertility and nutrient cycling, so the soil can provide and maintain the nutrients for the crops. For climate change mitigation, the sequestration of carbon in soils is important. And also for the climate change adaptation in the drier climate, the infiltration, especially also the retention of water, is important. So we need good soils to fulfill to these different functions of soils. Well, if we look to Europe, this is a picture of Europe. I have put the amount of nitrogen that is applied by mineral fertilizer in the left picture and animal manure in the right picture. And as you can see, it's quite different among Europe, but especially in the northwestern part, we see intensive agricultural use, where the Netherlands, I don't know if you see my mouse, but it's indicating where the Netherlands is. It's where we see very high, the red colors with the highest inputs of nitrogen to the soil. Historically, if we look to the amount of nitrogen surplus per hectare, we see that historically that has even been higher, and over the last decades we already reduced the amount of the nitrogen surplus. But still, for the Netherlands, for example, the current surplus is around 150 to 200 kilograms of nitrogen, which is quite a lot of nitrogen, which is mostly lost to the environment. In other countries, that surplus is less, but it's also in some regions it's very intensive agriculture as well. Well, one of the projects that should address circularity in agriculture is the Nutrient to Cycle project. This is a European project where we are participating. This is a large-scale project financed by the European Commission, with the objective to improve nutrient cycling in the European agriculture. This is a project which runs for the period 2018-2022 and coordinated by the University of Ghent in Belgium. So the idea of this project is to improve nutrient cycling by including processing as well. So this triangle shows the flows of nutrients, and we're looking at the nutrients of nitrogen and phosphorus, but also at carbon. So we really look at the interaction of carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus. So traditionally, you only have the flows from animal to crops, but by processing, you might improve this. So, for example, by processing animal manure, we might obtain better fertilizers, so they're called bio-based fertilizers and organic soil enhancers. The other way, if we have crop residues, by treating them, we might obtain novel animal feeds where we subtract proteins, for example, from residues and feed them directly and improve in that way the efficiency. But also between livestock and crop production, there's options to improve nutrient cycling by optimal fertilization, for example, precision agriculture, and also by producing more local feed crops. As in Europe, we have a high import of feed crops from, for example, Argentina and Brazil, which kind of disturbs this nutrient cycling. So what we first did in the project is quantifying these nutrient flows between the different components. The red boundary indicates what is the system boundary of nutrient to cycle, so the crop and livestock production. But it's important to also consider the flows which are going outside agriculture to the processing companies and the consumption, as finally you would also like to recycle the nutrients coming back from the human consumption and the food waste. What we see is that import of feed and import of fertilizer is a very large source of nitrogen coming into this agricultural system. But we have also quite some high losses of 5.7 megatons of nitrogen, which are lost to the environment. So by improving nutrient cycling, we have more or less three options to improve the cycling. Is to reduce the losses. We can reduce the import of mineral fertilizers, and we can reduce the import of feed. So by making the system more efficient and we have more local feed, we can reduce the import and improve the efficiency. Another aspect that's important to take into account is the stoichiometry of carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus in the agriculture. So stoichiometry is the ratio between the different components, and these differ for the different products. Although this is, in reality, we see a very large variation among crops and products and manure types. But if we average them and summarize them a bit and to show the differences, we see that there's quite clear that livestock products have more nitrogen and phosphorus. But also important is to see that soils are higher in carbon. So taking into account that if we apply animal manure, we add more carbon to the soils than compared to when we only apply fossil mineral fertilizers. So by taking into account and having a better match between the soils and the needs of the products and the amount of fertilizers by animal manure or other fertilizers, we can have a better match and therefore reduce the losses from agriculture. In the part below, we indicate what is the trend in the carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus. I won't explain that now, but we see, for example, for the soils, that we over the last decades have really increased the level of phosphorus in the soils by having those high rates of both mineral and organic fertilizers, whereas we see losses of carbon in the soils. Well, this is the situation for the Netherlands and Europe, but in Argentina this is likely to be different. Well, at the end, this is quite theoretical, of course, and at the end we have to farmers have to work with this, and well, they have to manage for their farms all these flows and emissions. So how to do this is of course their key question, and by focusing on only one of these flows, it's you might have losses easily going to other parts. So you really should look at the integrative part of this system to increase circularity and improve soil fertility. I now will show a few measures where we have worked on within this Nutrient to Cycle project and some other projects in the Netherlands, which can contribute to improved circularity on farms. So one option is nutrient recovery from manure. So it's processing of animal manure. First it's also because we in the Netherlands have a surplus of animal manure, so we have to export as farmers are allowed only a limited amount that can be applied of manure. So if we can process the manure and reduce the export, it saves a lot of money for the farmers. But it can also improve the use of nutrients if it better fits to what the crops require. Next one is precision fertilization, where we can have, for the farmer, can improve its crop yield, but we can also improve the nutrient use efficiency by applying the required amount at the right time for the crop. And shortly I will discuss on increasing soil carbon, which is in the Netherlands. We now, in our Dutch climate agreements, there's a target included for soil carbon sequestration in mineral soils. So there's now a lot of attention on that and which measures work and which don't. But besides carbon sequestration, soil carbon is also key for many other soil functions and to improve the soil productivity. So for a farmer itself, it's also good if he can increase the carbon level in the soil to have a better soil. For the nutrient recovery system, this is in one of the projects called Systemic. This picture shows how it works. So there is manure coming from farms, in this case mostly pig farms. And the manure is first digested in a biogas digester, which produces biogas, which is in this case used in a local dairy factory. And then the digestate is going into further processing, where they first use a decanter, which splits between a solid and liquid fraction. And then the solid fraction is with a phosphate stripper they have developed. They can get struvite or calcium phosphate, which is a pea fertilizer. phosphate fertilizer, which can be exported, as we in the Netherlands have the high surplus on phosphate. So we cannot. That's the reason mostly why manure has to be exported. But in this case, the other component is the soil improver, which is then lower in phosphate, and so in that way we can keep the carbon, which is important for the soils in the local area. On the other hand, you have the liquid fraction, which is then further treated, and we get a nitrogen potassium concentrate, which can be used on grassland by farmers to replace mineral fertilizer. And the last fraction is water, so a lot which is that clear that can go directly to surface water. So a lot of transport of otherwise, the liquid manures that contains a lot of water is now prevented. For precision fertilization, well, in general, you can say is applying the so-called 4R strategy. So it's applying the right type of fertilization, apply it in the right rate, and apply it at the right time and at the right place. So, well, especially right place is where precision fertilization is focusing on. So the main measures for nutrients are and in precision fertilization are controlled traffic, which is just simply having tractors with GPS so they can really go over the field in such a way that they don't have double spread of fertilizers or chemical pesticides, and in that way already improve the efficiency. But more important is variable rate technology, which means that before soil maps are made, which indicate where are the spots in the field with higher nutrient conditions and with lower. You can also use drones to identify if the crop is already there, where is a need for further nutrients in the second application. And then with those machines, you can apply them not in variable rates, so that not every spot on the field receives the same amount as is traditional. One of the farms is Van den Bonne. It's a potato farmer who's in our to Cycle project. He is doing a lot of work on precision fertilization, also using drones. And here we combine the strategy of precision fertilization with the application of the processed manure products, which are developed in the project. And on that, we currently are applying an experiment. So often with animal manures, the so-called fertilizer replacement value is lower, so they are less efficient in the mineral fertilizers. But we see by processing we can increase the fertilizer replacement value, so that it's quite well. Finally, you would like to have them to be evenly effective as mineral fertilizers. So we're testing this now with potato in both a crop and a field experiment and in a pot experiment, where we used 3 different products from the pig manure, which has been processed. It's the simple liquid fraction with mainly nitrogen and potassium together, without a lot of other processing. Then there's a potassium concentrate, and there's scrubbing salt. So that's where after the washing of the ammonia-rich emissions are filtered, so we get a salt high in ammonium. So we have to apply these products, and the experiment is still ongoing, but we already see that at the plant height that there is not a significant difference between the chemical fertilizers and the bio-based fertilizers. So it seems to work well, and the idea is now to convince farmers to try to use these products, as they often are a bit scared whether if it's similar effective as the mineral fertilizers. Finally on soil carbon, there's a large program where we are working on, and we're doing a lot of field pilots with farmers and in long-term experiments to test different measures to increase soil carbon. We can aggregate these in the classes I've included. So one is have less disturbance of the soil. So we're looking at measures like reduced tillage and maintaining permanent grassland. Have more plant residues. So that includes using cover crops and green manures. No removal of straw, but incorporated in the soil. But also, and that's probably the most important one, is have an improved crop rotation. So having more crops in rotation that provide a lot of carbon to the soil. So more cereals or have a year of grass in an arable rotation. Other measures are additions of external organic matter like animal manures, compost, or other soil improvers. This can work fine for the farmers, but the question is to what extent is this really additional, as it might be more, as there is a limited amount of material that is available, and it can be rather replacing than really being additional organic matter. And then, well, in the Netherlands, so far, not really important, but an option is, of course, to have more perennial crops and agroforestry systems, where also in the above ground biomass carbon is sequestered. And something which is, in the Netherlands at least, important as well is to reduce emissions from our peat soils, where we have soils that with quite high emissions. So options there are raising the water table, and there's also techniques that's called submerged drainage. So we can keep still intensive use, but have higher water levels. But there's also investigations on completely other types of agriculture. So it's so-called paludiculture. It's wet agriculture, where you use crops that can deal with those very high water tables. There's one initiative which I also would like to mention, where we are currently working with. It's the so-called Soil Heroes initiative. They want to develop a platform for promoting regenerative agriculture by providing the farmer with financial incentives and offering buyers a reliable way to become so-called planet positive. So buyers can buy credits, and then we are now doing the quantification for soil carbon. So in the picture we show this is plots from the farm in the Netherlands, where they apply this already since 10 years, and we have modeled and measured also the carbon increase, and we see a clear increase in carbon by using these regenerative practices. So if we have it on, those practices comprises reduced tillage, keeping the soil as much covered as possible, and reduced chemical inputs, and we see clear effects on the soil carbon content. So with this, I want to close my presentation with some final remarks. Well, we've seen that there's a lot of options available, and there's no single solution that would work everywhere. So we have really to be region and farm specific in the measures that are required. So I think that's the main challenge also for the coming years, is how to come from general advice to specific farm advice for an individual farm. And to do that, monitoring will become important to get really more data from this farm and get, for example, models running for each individual farm to come up with really the right advice for those farmers. And of course, at the end, it's important. Mostly of these practices might have an additional cost. So what are the incentives for farmers to apply these measures? We see that farmers are willing, but so far, no obligations are there, and the additional cost is not funded. So options for them are first of all looking at the policies. In Europe, we will get a new common agricultural policy after 2020, which is still in development, but it's already clear that there's more focus on measures that are focusing also on climate change mitigation. The so-called eco schemes are under development. So, but this is still to be defined. Something else is really to look at the value chain incentives, like labeling for sustainability. We see in the Netherlands already dairy companies really working with this, where farmers get a premium if they fulfill certain conditions on greenhouse gas emissions, nitrogen emissions, but also biodiversity. And yeah, there's a lot of hope by many farmers that there's also carbon credit like systems that can will be developed, and where people can buy those credits, which can then finance the cost for the farmers. But the main question is, of course, is a consumer willing to pay for these higher prices to get those initiatives running. So with that, I would like to finalize my presentation, and if there's any questions, please let me know. Gracias por su atención.
Gracias, Jan. Very good presentation. Was really good. I have some questions for you. So we have time for until the finish. So I'm gonna try to give you some questions that are from the audience. You show in some of your slides that in Netherlands you have a reduction of nitrogen fertilizer by 50% or so in 10 years, something like that. So the question will be, could you be able to maintain the level of the crop yields or the crop stability, let's say, in terms of production, with less nitrogen into your farms, or you see that was both things, was like reduction of nitrogen and reduction of crop or yield in each of the farms?
This reduction has been since the 1990s, when there was introduction of the manure policies, which reduced quite a lot the amount of nitrogen applied. We saw that especially on grassland there was a very high surplus, and grassland yields have more or less remained stable since then. So it has not really decreased, and we could maintain it. Whereas in arable, the surplus was less, but most of the crop yields are still increasing even. So, and if we look, if we apply it more at the right time, and you see that there's even still with further reduction possibility to maintain or increase crop yields.
Okay, that's good, Jan. And what strategy you are using for this nutrient cyclage in different farms, and how you are dealing with small farmers, or what you can say for small farmers that they want to improve and do some circular economy in the fertilizer aspect, but they don't have the structure and they don't know how to do it. There are some solutions in order to that, or we have to wait for some commercial development for the farmers?
And at least in the Netherlands, really small farms we don't have. So I think most of the farmers in the Netherlands are quite well educated, and for example, all dairy farmers, they are now obliged to use a tool, is so-called the kringloopwijzer, which they have to fill in, which already monitors all the nutrient flows on their farm. So with that tool, they can already get insights and how to improve the nutrient cycling on dairy farms, as this is one of the obligations from the policies to so they have to show at their farm that they don't use more nitrogen and phosphorus than they are allowed. So they fill in those tools. But for other countries in Europe, that's indeed where we still have more smaller farms and which are less well educated. Where I think there's still the farm advice should take a key role in helping, assisting them. And then often it can be very simple measures that don't have to cost a lot. But they should have the possibility, of course, to apply those measures. But
that's good. And you also mentioned some support from government and the European Commission going with these goals, these new goals. But the question will be, which are the tools that the government gives to the farmer to apply this kind of circular economy? I mean, do you have strict fundings from governments, or can you give us your vision from Netherlands?
Yeah. This is still, if we look specifically to circular agriculture, then the ministry has put that vision that in 2030 they want to obtain that and have better soils. But it's still under discussion what are the exact measures, how to improve this. So far they are looking at a lot of initiatives and pilots, and then also farmers who come up with themselves with all kinds of solutions. And we see there's a range of nice solutions, also collaborations between dairy farmers and arable farmers. But to get all farmers and doing so and promoting it, that's still under discussion, and there's still need for further instruments to obtain this. And there will be, under the new common agricultural policy, there will be new instruments, but the question is to what extent that is sufficient and whether there's sufficient funding to obtain real changes. So there's a lot of discussion, especially in the Netherlands, but not always yet the clear picture for how to do it for all farmers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you mentioned at the end also as well that the question was if some consumers will be willing to pay more for some sustainability production. And maybe if we are talking about circular agriculture and we are talking about taking advantage of that, for example, manure or different effluents that we may have, maybe we are reducing our costs. So maybe our practices are not expensive as the traditional ones. And also you mentioned some initiative with the regenerative agriculture that you are measuring the impact in yields, but also are you measuring that in cost and in benefit for the farmer?
Yeah. Yes, most of especially if for example, for regenerative agriculture, over time you will get improved soils and probably your yields will be equal or might even be better. But it's often that in the first years in such a transition, you will lose some of the yields and that's an important period, how to get the farmer supported for a few years to make that transition, and that he can survive those first years where he might have a lower income. I think there's the main challenge with many of these practices, that doesn't have to be a lot of cost, but we see that often it might have some effect on crop yields in the first years.
So, and the other question will be, if you think that this kind of initiative or research that you are doing with different projects is applicable to different parts, for example, Argentina, we are talking about Argentina now, or we have to expect some support as well from local authorities or for governments?
Yeah. What I said, I think it's not directly everywhere where the problems in Argentina are probably quite different. Well, in some regions it might be similar, but I assume that you don't have that much high nutrient surpluses, and you might have even with the export of a lot of, as we import a lot of feed, we also import the nutrients, whereas you export much more nutrients and have to replace them. Yeah, if there's not sufficient anymore, when you have to buy fossil sources. So ideally, you should get part of our manure back to Argentina to close the cycle. But for example, for Argentina might be well, I don't know the specific situation, but I can imagine maybe that increasing phosphorus availability in soils is important, and having more nitrogen fixing crops. Well, you already have a more efficient system than we have in most of Europe, where we hardly have any nitrogen fixing crops, as most of it is imported. So in that way, well, you should have a good view of the nutrient flows in a country or a system. But I can imagine that in Argentina it's a bit more close than we are having it in Europe.
Okay, no, that's clear. And when you're measuring this carbon impact that you mentioned, what you can say about, and I can imagine that utilizing this kind of techniques with manure and all the stuff, our carbon footprint is lower, let's say, right? You are taking into consideration the whole cycle. I mean, the whole life cycle of a crop or of a product. I mean, the fertilizer, the nitrogen fertilizer or the manure is being manufactured, and then is being grown, some crops in the farm, and then it's going to be sold as dairy or as whatever. Are you measuring the whole impact in the whole chain, or just at the farm level?
Yeah. No, the idea is, well, in many of these projects we are now currently working on this is to do a life cycle analysis for the whole system. So the question indeed for the manure processing, it requires still quite some energy and some chemicals. So the question is indeed, how does it work? And well, you don't have, maybe your emissions from fertilizer production are lower, but so that is being quantified. But it's, for many, there's still work ongoing in this case for the solution I presented.
Okay, that's good. So, and do you think this is scalable? The project that you mentioned are scalable to put into consideration for the food industry to measure their impact in their production of different products? You think that will be the most interest stakeholder in this kind of projects, or you are seeing a better involvement from the farmer than from the industry?
No, I think both. Of course, first, a farmer is the one who has to apply measures, and he has to be certain that it works and that he is convinced to apply these measures. But I think that the industry can make a large difference if they promoting these, and they can reach a lot of farmers. If we as researchers only have to work directly with the farmers, we don't reach that many. So companies we see are sometimes promoting now more sustainable practices than governments do. And we see, for example, in the dairy sector, there's quite some companies who have put quite some ambitious goals on climate change mitigation, and also for the entire chain, so including their farmers. So we see a lot of work is going on now. So we need both.
Okay, that's good. And just one of the last question. I think you mentioned something about the water, but how you see this reduction of 50% of nitrogen fertilizers in the impact of the water resources on each farm? I mean, do you have some contamination from lixiviation of that fertilizer, and using this kind of techniques, maybe you are dealing also with that issue, or how you see that?
Yeah, this is, well, the water is so far the so-called nitrates directive in Europe has been leading for the policies on reducing the nitrogen surplus. So and we see that well, in the Netherlands the levels have improved. So the nitrate level in groundwater should not be above 50 milligrams of nitrates per liter. Well, we've seen quite a decrease, but still there are quite some regions where it's still exceeding that norm. So therefore, it's not finished yet, and more measures, especially in those sandy soils, are required. But one of the options is, if your soil is containing, if you're sequestering carbon, you also sequester nitrogen. So you can improve that, and using catch crops, for example. If you grow them after the main crop, they take up the remaining nitrogen in the autumn before it leaches out, and then it can provide the nitrogen again when the crop is plowed under in spring. So those measures that are both good for the soil carbon and also can reduce the nitrate leaching.
Good, Jan. Well, I think that it was pretty clear, all the things that you mentioned, and the presentation was really good. I appreciate your time and to join us in our Congress. So anything you would like to add? We have just 1 or 2 minutes, but if not, we are done.
Well, no, thanks for this presentation. And if anyone has any question, you can always email me. My email is on the sheet. And yeah, it was a pleasure to present this here. And well, hopefully some follow up, maybe if would be nice.
Good. Well, Jan, congratulations for your work, and thanks again for joining us in our Congress.
Okay.
Bueno, gracias a todos. Ahí llegamos al final, así que muchas gracias a todos los que estuvieron conectados. Gracias, Jan.
Okay.
Bye, bye.
There we go.